This is the first time in 15 years, and I've been doing this work for 15 years. It's the first time that I've sat in a room with only manifestors, and I'm a manifestor myself. And it's something that I look forward to, because there are things that I can tell you that are of enormous value to you in the way in which your life works and the way in which you can make your life easier. It's actually very difficult. As a matter of fact, it's extremely difficult to live a life as a manifestor. Now, don't, put yourself on some kind of cross because of that. My life is difficult because I'm a manifestor, but nonetheless, being a manifestor is something that is different than most human beings that are on the planet. If you take a room full of 10 people, chances are one of them will be a manifestor. And that one person out of that 10 actually functions differently, lives differently, operates differently than any of the other people in that room. And the rest of the people in that room, not at a conscious level, not in terms of how they actually think, but in terms of how they actually feel, the one manifestor in the room is the one being that's making them uncomfortable. Everything that makes life difficult for most humans is actually easy for manifestors. And it's always been easy for manifestors, because there's a basic difference between manifestors and everybody else. Everybody else has to wait. Everybody else has to wait. Everybody else has to wait for a response, has to wait for an invitation, has to wait for cycles of time. Every other type, and that's 91% of humanity, every other type has to wait. And so their relationship to life and their relationship to how life works is very different than that of a manifestor, because the manifestor is the only type that's not designed to wait. The fact of the matter is that the manifestor is designed to be action. The manifestor is designed to do. And for most of human history, that was very valuable. In other words, it was useful to have somebody who could just get up and do something without having to wait for consensus, without having to wait for agreement with others, without having to ask a lot of questions. There was simply somebody that got up and moved. All the laws that we live by, the religious codes, all of the things that are stamped on humanity about their ability to make things happen, and you've got to be able to get up there and do it, and all of that stuff, it all comes from manifestors. It's why most of humanity is uncomfortable with them. And they're uncomfortable with them because the manifestor aura, the aura you put off, says to somebody else, you don't need them. In the psyche of the other, it creates a sense of lack of trust. Manifestors are not trusted. In the work that I've done over all of these years, one of the things that is important to me is that whenever I look at somebody's chart, I look at them as a child. It is very difficult to transform adult manifestors. It is very difficult to decondition adult manifestors. It is much, much easier to deal with young manifestors, and ideally the best situation would be to have human beings raised correctly according to their nature. However, right now that's not the case. Think about how this works. When the manifestor child comes into the world, and the moment that it comes out of the womb, the mother at a deep unconscious level goes, uh-oh. I mean, it's instantaneous. Uh-oh. And that uh-oh is, this is going to be a problem. This child's going to be a problem. They're going to be a pain in the neck. They're going to be impossible to control. I'm going to have a problem with this child. Now, it's not like that's necessarily articulated as a concept in the mother. It's an auric response to bringing a manifestor into the world. And of course, one of the things that all manifestors understand is that from the moment that they come into the world, they're watched in a different way than their siblings who are not manifestors. They're the ones that have controls placed upon them. Think about the manifestor child that's 3 or 4 years old. That manifestor child wakes up in the morning and it goes down into the house and it looks out the window to the backyard and it sees that the sun is shining and it's pretty and there's flowers and there's birds and there's stuff to do. What does that child do? The manifestor child opens the door and goes outside. They don't need anybody to open the door for them. They don't need anybody to get them to go and do something. They don't need any motivation, nor do they ask. They just go outside. And being manifestors and not really being limited in terms of their action, they may not stay in the garden. You know, they may go wandering into the next garden and then into the next garden, just doing their thing. Now you know what happens when the mother starts looking for them. And of course, by the time the mother finds the child is going to get punished. The child's going to be restricted. There's going to be controls that are placed on the child. Now that's all, you know, fairly normal, other than the fact that in a lot of cases the need to and the impression that it's necessary to control a manifestor child leads to violence. That is, that manifestor children, more than any other children, are physically abused. In other words, that they're the kind of children who are, you know, who are trained and enforced to follow the rules. And of course, all of this leads to something very basic about all manifestors. And as I said, being a manifestor myself, I know this movie. And what lies in all of us is a deep, deep, deep anger. Anger. That's the theme of being a manifestor, is anger. And it's anger over the fact that you cannot be left alone to do your thing. It's the anger that you're not considered trustworthy. It's the anger that there's all these other people who are always going to get in your face, they're always going to get in your way, and you resent it. You cannot come into this life without meeting a generator. Whether it's your mother or your father or the combination of you and them or whatever the case may be, that sacral center ends up getting defined. Now it's very important as a manifestor to understand that that's not who you are. And most manifestors become addicted to the sacral center. And not simply addicted to it, but enslaved to it. And one of the simplest ways to understand that is the sacral center, thematically as a motor, is about work. Work. That is, my description of generators is slaves. You know, these are the slaves, they work all the time, they never stop, they're pumping on this generating capacity. Manifestors aren't like that. Not only aren't manifestors like that, but when it comes to that sacral center, the true manifestor doesn't want to be conditioned to work. Think about that. The true manifestor doesn't want to be conditioned to work. Because the moment that that sacral center gets turned on, the centers that are white in the body graph, when you take in somebody else's energy, you amplify that. In other words, manifestors tend to be the world's super slaves. Super slaves. Amplified slaves. And amplified slaves being conditioned by other people as to what work to do. Now that's not what manifestors are all about. So one of the first things to understand about the nature of a manifestor is that you're not here to be conditioned in this life as to what you do. You're not. Manifestors have a real hard time being told what to do. You know, manifestors aren't waiting for somebody to ask them, to tell them, to invite them. That's all the other types. Manifestors can't stand it when somebody says, you do that. And everything inside of the manifestor cringes and the anger comes boiling up. Because we're designed I'm a manifestor, we're designed not to be conditioned in the way in which we work or what we work at. Now think about what that's like when you come into the world. You don't know any of that. And your parents don't know any of that. And if you're a manifestor, you're going to have a generative field around you. You know, and then you're going to be controlled. And it is this control of the manifestor that is so terribly upsetting. It is this controlling agency that leads the manifestor later in life not to use its power because it does not want to have to deal with rejection, it doesn't want to have to deal with controls, it doesn't want to have to deal with interference, it doesn't want to have to deal with any of that. So instead of being a manifestor, they give up on it. And they pretend that they're a generator and run around being super slaves doing things that only make them angry.